Donald Trump has fundamentally altered the landscape of the ongoing trade conflict by shifting his focus away from traditional sectors like automotive manufacturing, energy exports, and agricultural products. For months, the tension between Washington and Ottawa revolved around tangible goods like cars and oil, but this morning the administration officially opened a new front in the digital domain. The White House formally classified Canada's entire ecosystem of digital regulations, an intricate web of laws and policies meticulously constructed by Ottawa over the last 3 years, as illegal trade barriers. This declaration marks a significant escalation because it moves the fight from physical borders to the digital infrastructure that powers the modern economy. By targeting bits and bytes rather than steel and grain, the administration is signaling that it views Canadian domestic tech policy as a direct threat to American economic dominance. The specific targets of this White House declaration are 3 pillars of Canada's digital strategy that have long frustrated Silicon Valley. First, the administration is demanding the immediate end of content contribution rules, which force American streaming giants to fund Canadian-made movies and music. Second, it is attacking data localization requirements that mandate certain sensitive information about Canadian citizens be stored on servers located within Canada rather than in US-based cloud data centers. Third, it is targeting digital platform taxes that levy fees on the massive revenues American tech firms generate from Canadian users. The Trump administration has framed these policies not as legitimate cultural or privacy protections, but as a shakedown designed to extract money from American innovators. The ultimatum delivered this morning was blunt. Canada must eliminate these regulations immediately or face severe unspecified economic consequences that go far beyond simple tariffs. This confrontation is about much more than just streaming fees or where a hard drive is located. It is a high-stakes battle over the concept of digital sovereignty. At its core, the dispute asks whether a democratic nation has the right to govern the digital lives of its citizens, or if American trade pressure can be used to bypass a sovereign country's laws. The White House is essentially attempting to use the leverage of the U.S. economy to force an ally to give American corporations special exemptions from local laws. Exemptions these companies failed to win through Canada's regular democratic and legislative processes. This creates a dangerous precedent where trade threats, rather than national elections or parliamentary debates, could determine the rules for the internet, data privacy, and cultural expression inside a sovereign country. The Canadian response to this digital broadside was not characterized by the usual slow pace of international diplomacy. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not retreat into days of quiet deliberation or hold emergency cabinet meetings that stretched late into the night. Instead, Ottawa's countermove was instantaneous and surgically precise. Sources within several Canadian federal ministries revealed that the government had a response framework fully developed and sitting on a shelf since February. Canadian officials had correctly predicted that the Trump administration would eventually move the trade war into the technology sector, and had spent months preparing for this exact provocation. This wasn't a panicked reaction, it was the execution of a pre-planned strategy designed to meet American aggression with equal force in the digital arena. What is happening right now between Washington and Ottawa has become a global test case for how any country manages its digital borders in the 21st century. Governments in Brussels, Tokyo, and Canberra are watching this specific confrontation with intense focus, because they are all wrestling with the same questions about data, platform power, and national identity. If the United States successfully forces Canada to dismantle its digital laws through trade threats, it will signal to the rest of the world that American tech giants are effectively immune to foreign regulation. However, if Canada successfully defends its right to regulate its own digital space, it will provide a blueprint for other middle powers to assert their own digital sovereignty. The outcome of this clash will determine the rules for the global digital economy for at least the next decade, deciding who truly controls the data and content that define modern life. The spark for this massive digital confrontation was lit on the morning of April 8, 2026, when Donald Trump posted a 112-word message to Truth Social that fundamentally changed the relationship between the United States and Canada. In this post, the president formally declared 3 specific Canadian regulatory frameworks to be illegal trade barriers under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. This specific law is a powerful tool that allows the U.S. president to unilaterally investigate and punish foreign countries for trade practices that are deemed unfair or discriminatory against American commerce. By invoking Section 301, Trump moved the dispute out of the realm of standard diplomatic talk and into a formal legal process that leads directly to aggressive retaliation. He named 3 primary targets that he claimed were part of a coordinated effort by Ottawa to shake down American technology companies and steal their profits. The first target in this declaration was Canada's Online Streaming Act. This law requires American streaming giants like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime Video to take a percentage of the revenue they earn from Canadian subscribers and reinvest it back into the production of Canadian television, film, and music. The Trump administration views this not as a cultural policy, but as a forced subsidy where American companies are being made to pay for their own competition. The second target was Canada's data localization framework. This policy requires that certain sensitive categories of data, such as health records, financial information, and government files, must be stored on physical servers located inside Canada's borders. This directly threatens the business models of American cloud providers like Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services, who prefer to move data freely across borders into their massive US-based data centers to save costs. The third and perhaps most contentious target was Canada's Digital Services Tax, or DST. This is a 3% levy on the Canadian revenues of large digital platforms that have global annual revenues exceeding €750 million. Because the vast majority of companies that fit this description are American icons like Google, Meta, and Apple, the White House has characterized the tax as a targeted hit on American innovation. Trump's Truth Social post argued that these 3 measures combined to form an unacceptable wall designed to keep American tech out and drain their resources. He announced that a formal Section 301 investigation had been opened immediately, with preliminary findings due in just 30 days. This incredibly short timeline was designed to put maximum pressure on the Canadian government, leaving them almost no time to negotiate before the first wave of punishments would be authorized. The retaliation promised by the president was both severe and unprecedented. He first threatened to slap heavy tariffs on all Canadian digital service imports, which would make it much more expensive for Canadian tech firms to sell their software or services in the US market. However, it was his second threat that truly shocked the global tech community. He promised to restrict Canadian technology companies from accessing American digital infrastructure. This was the moment experts realized this was not a standard trade war. Digital infrastructure includes the undersea cables, the domain name systems, and the massive server farms that allow the internet to function. If the US actually moved to block a neighboring country from the physical and logical plumbing of the internet, it would be the first time a democratic nation has used its control over digital architecture as a weapon against a close ally. This threat to restrict infrastructure access raised immediate and terrifying legal questions that no one was prepared to answer. Legal scholars and tech executives began scrambling to figure out what restricting access would actually look like in a practical, operational sense. Would the US government order American companies to stop routing Canadian internet traffic? Would they block Canadian firms from using American-owned cloud platforms or payment processors? There is no clear legal authority in existing US law that gives a president the power to turn off pieces of the internet for a specific ally without causing massive collateral damage. Experts warned that such an action would destroy the open, rules-based architecture that American tech companies themselves rely on to operate globally. By threatening the infrastructure itself, Trump signaled he was willing to break the very foundation of the digital world to win a trade fight with Canada. The Trump administration's decision to launch a Section 301 investigation into Canadian digital policy was built on a massive strategic miscalculation regarding how much leverage the United States actually held. By targeting Canada's digital regulations, the White House aimed its fire directly at the core of the American technology sector, affecting the most powerful companies in the world. The measures named in the investigation, specifically the rules on data storage, content streaming, and digital taxes, hit the big 3 of cloud computing: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. It also directly threatens the revenue models of Meta, Apple, and every major American streaming service operating north of the border. Because the Canadian and American technology economies are more deeply integrated than any other 2 nations on Earth, any attempt to disrupt this relationship is like trying to pull apart a single unified machine. The Trump team failed to realize that by attacking Canadian tech rules, they were putting the stability and profits of their own most successful domestic companies at immediate risk. Internal reporting from within the White House suggests that the administration's trade policy team believed Canada was uniquely vulnerable in the digital domain. Their logic was that while areas like energy, agriculture, and defense are protected by decades of established treaties and clear international laws, digital regulations exist in a much more contested and murky legal space. The administration calculated that Canada would not be able to defend its digital sovereignty as effectively as it defended its oil exports or auto manufacturing. They expected that a sudden high-pressure legal threat like a Section 301 investigation would catch Ottawa off guard and force them to fold quickly to protect their tech industry's access to the US market. The Trump team assumed that because the internet is global, Canada would fear any disruption to the digital status quo and would choose to scrap its domestic laws rather than engage in a messy technical trade war. However, this assessment had a fatal flaw. The Canadian government was not only aware of this vulnerability, but they were also completely prepared for it. While the US thought they were launching a surprise attack, a dedicated working group within Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada had already spent 4 months preparing for this exact scenario. This team of experts had developed a comprehensive technology sovereignty response framework, specifically designed to counter an American Section 301 challenge. They had mapped out every possible move the White House could make, and had their counter-moves ready to go. The Canadian government had been watching the pattern of escalation in other sectors like the potato ban and energy threats, and concluded that it was only a matter of time before the digital sector was targeted. They didn't just have a plan, they had a fully vetted, legally cross-referenced weapon waiting in the wings. The speed and efficiency of Canada's response proved just how badly the Trump administration had misjudged the situation. Trump's Truth Social post landed at 9:47 a.m., and within a staggering 43 minutes, the Prime Minister's office had reviewed the pre-prepared response framework and authorized its activation. There was no panic, no emergency brainstorming sessions, and no desperate calls for outside advice. The Canadian government moved with the precision of a military operation because the work had already been done. By 11 a.m., Mark Carney was already standing at a podium in the National Press Theatre in Ottawa. He didn't need a teleprompter or a massive team of advisors. He arrived with a single page of notes, ready to deliver a blow that the White House never saw coming. Carney's message was direct and stripped of all diplomatic fluff. He told the world that Canadian digital regulations are not trade barriers, but essential tools for ensuring that Canadian citizens retain sovereignty over their own digital lives, their culture, and their personal data. He framed the issue as a fundamental right of a democratic nation to govern itself in the digital age, regardless of pressure from a larger neighbor. By the time he finished speaking, he had laid out a 3-track counteroffensive that targeted American tech companies where it hurt them most: their government contracts, their legal standing, and their future growth. The precision of this hard counter sent immediate shockwaves through global financial markets, proving that Canada was not the weak link the Trump administration thought it was, but was instead the most prepared adversary they had encountered yet. Instead of retreating or offering concessions in the face of Washington's threats, the Canadian government has chosen to double down with a strategy known as regulatory acceleration. This is the first track of Ottawa's counteroffensive, and it is designed to turn American pressure into a catalyst for making Canada's digital rules even more permanent and harder to undo. Prime Minister Mark Carney has signaled that Canada will not be intimidated into dismantling its digital sovereignty. Instead, the government is moving to lock these policies into place faster than ever before. The core logic of this move is simple. If the United States treats Canadian regulations as a problem to be eliminated, Canada will respond by making those regulations a permanent, institutionalized part of its national economy. The first major action under this track is the expedited implementation of data localization requirements. For years, Canada had been in a slow process of consulting with industry experts and tech companies about which types of data should be required to stay on Canadian servers. Trump's Section 301 investigation has ended that period of debate. Canada has now moved these requirements into expedited implementation, meaning that the rules for storing sensitive health, financial, and personal data within Canada's borders are going into effect immediately, rather than over several years. By cutting the consultation period short, Canada is forcing American cloud giants like Amazon and Microsoft to either build more physical infrastructure in Canada or lose the ability to handle sensitive Canadian data. This move is a direct message to Washington. The more you attack our right to control our data, the faster we will build the walls that keep it here. The second part of this acceleration involves the Online Streaming Act. Under the original plan, American streaming platforms were required to contribute a base rate of 5% of their Canadian revenues to support local content production. In response to Trump's call-out, Canada is now moving to increase those contribution rates significantly, with the change set to take effect within just 60 days. This is a direct financial blow to companies like Netflix and Disney+. By increasing the percentage these companies must pay into Canadian content funds, Ottawa is proving that American pressure will result in a higher cost of doing business, not a lower one. This is a cost-imposing strategy. Canada is showing that every time the US tries to use trade leverage to help American tech companies, Canada will use its regulatory power to make those same companies pay a steeper price. The most aggressive and long-term component of Track 1 is the introduction of legislation for the Canadian Digital Sovereignty Fund. This is a massive, government-administered investment pool specifically designed to build a domestic alternative to American technology dominance. This fund will be partially bankrolled by the revenues collected from the digital services tax, the very tax that Donald Trump has declared illegal. The money will be used to support the development of Canadian-owned cloud infrastructure, AI research, and social media platforms. The goal is to progressively reduce Canada's dependency on American giants like Google and Meta by building a homegrown digital ecosystem. Instead of the digital services tax being a simple fee, it is now being turned into a strategic weapon that funds Canada's long-term independence from the American tech sector. The message embedded in this entire first track is unmistakable and deliberately blunt. American pressure has failed to create leverage. In fact, the harder Washington pushes against Canada's digital framework, the more institutionalized and aggressive that framework becomes. By moving from a defensive posture to an acceleration posture, Canada has made it clear that there is no path back to the status quo. These regulations are no longer just policies, they are the foundation of a new Canadian economic strategy that prioritizes national control over open market access. Trump's attempt to break Canada's digital laws has instead forced Canada to build them faster, stronger, and with a permanent funding source that ensures they will be a feature of the North American economy for decades to come. The second track of Canada's counter-offensive is a sophisticated international legal challenge launched simultaneously in two of the world's most powerful trade forums. Rather than simply arguing over the details of digital taxes or streaming rules, Ottawa is striking at the very heart of the Trump administration's legal authority to act. Canada has filed a formal dispute with the World Trade Organization, WTO, and a separate challenge under Chapter 28 of the USMCA. This pincer movement in the legal world is designed to prove that the US government is violating its own treaty obligations by using the Section 301 investigation as a weapon of unilateral aggression. By taking this route, Prime Minister Mark Carney is forcing the US to defend its actions before international judges, moving the conflict out of the realm of political social media posts and into a structured legal environment where America First rhetoric carries no weight. In the WTO dispute, Canada is making the aggressive argument that the Section 301 investigation itself is a violation of international trade law. Under the WTO's Dispute Settlement Understanding, DSU, member nations are strictly prohibited from making unilateral determinations that another country has violated trade rules. The DSU was created specifically to end the era of vigilante justice in global trade, requiring countries to seek a multilateral ruling before they can impose retaliatory sanctions. Canada is citing Article 23 of the DSU, which mandates that when members seek the redress of a violation, they must follow WTO procedures rather than taking the law into their own hands. By initiating a 30-day investigation with pre-planned findings and threats of tariffs, the Trump administration is effectively bypassing the global referee. Canada's legal team is arguing that this behavior undermines the entire rules-based system that the US helped build, turning the Section 301 process into an illegal instrument of state-sponsored bullying. Simultaneously, Canada has triggered a USMCA Chapter 28 challenge, which deals specifically with the administration and enforcement of the Regional Trade Agreement. The core of this challenge focuses on Trump's threat to restrict Canadian technology companies' access to American digital infrastructure. Canada is pointing to Chapter 19, Digital Trade of the USMCA, particularly Article 19.3 and 19.4, which protect the non-discriminatory treatment of digital products and prohibit the imposition of customs duties or other charges on digital transmissions. More importantly, Canada is arguing that the threat to block access to the physical and logical plumbing of the Internet violates the fundamental commitment to the free flow of digital commerce. By threatening to turn off the digital taps for a treaty partner, the US is violating the core promise of the USMCA to create a seamless, integrated North American market. Canada's legal argument is direct. You cannot claim to be renegotiating or enforcing a treaty while simultaneously threatening to destroy the digital infrastructure that makes the treaty functional. This dual-track legal strategy is a masterclass in using an opponent's own rules against them. The Trump administration often frames its trade actions as a return to fairness and the rule of law, but Canada is now using those exact concepts to put the White House on trial. By filing these challenges, Ottawa is signaling to the global community that it is the one defending the international order, while Washington is the one breaking it. This puts the US in a difficult position. If they ignore the WTO and USMCA proceedings, they effectively kill the very agreements they claim to be using to protect American workers. If they participate, they risk a formal legal ruling that declares their Section 301 investigation illegal before it even produces its first set of findings. The final and most important goal of Track 2 is to create a legal shield for American and Canadian businesses. By placing the dispute in the hands of the WTO and USMCA panels, Canada is providing a sense of predictability for markets that have been rattled by the president's threats. International legal challenges are notoriously slow, often taking months or years to resolve. By starting this process now, Canada is ensuring that any attempt by the Trump administration to impose tariffs will be met with a cloud of legal uncertainty. This strategy is designed to make American tech giants hesitate. If they know the US government's actions might be ruled illegal in a few months, they are much less likely to support the administration's aggressive tactics. Canada has effectively turned the courtroom into a second front in the trade war, one where the US no longer has the home field advantage. The third track of Canada's counter-offensive is a direct financial strike that hit the American technology sector where it hurts most, its guaranteed government revenue. While the first two tracks dealt with long-term regulations and international law, this third track focuses on immediate economic consequences. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that the Canadian government is initiating a formal, 90-day review of every single government contract for cloud computing and digital infrastructure currently held by American companies. These contracts represent a massive and reliable income stream for Silicon Valley, worth approximately $4.2 billion Canadian dollars every year. By putting this money on the table, Canada has moved from a defensive stance to a direct offensive that puts the profits of America's most powerful companies in immediate danger. The primary goal of this review is to determine whether continuing to host Canadian government data on American-owned servers is consistent with the country's new data sovereignty standards. The Canadian Treasury Board is investigating whether sensitive citizen information, internal government communications, and national security data are safe when they are stored in the cloud systems of a country that is currently threatening Canada with trade war measures. The review specifically asks if allied technology providers, meaning companies from friendly nations other than the United States, should be substituted in for American firms. This opens the door for competitors from the European Union or domestic Canadian firms to take over contracts that have been dominated by American giants for over a decade. To make the pressure even more intense, Carney announced an immediate freeze on all new government spending with American digital infrastructure providers. No new contracts will be awarded, and no existing contracts will be expanded or renewed until the 90-day review is complete. This procurement freeze creates an immediate hole in the financial projections of companies like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. These companies rely on government contracts because they are stable, multi-year agreements that provide recurring revenue, which is highly valued by stock market investors. By putting a 90-day clock on these billions of dollars, Canada has ensured that these tech giants cannot simply ignore the trade war. They are now forced to explain to their shareholders why their Canadian revenue is suddenly at risk of disappearing. The impact of this announcement was visible on Wall Street within 20 minutes of Carney finishing his statement. The stock prices for Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet, Google's parent company, saw measurable declines as traders realized the scale of the Canadian retaliation. For these companies, the Canadian government is not just a regulator, it is a major customer. When a customer as large as a G7 government announces it is looking for non-American alternatives for its $4.2 billion in annual spending, the market reacts instantly. This move was a masterclass in economic leverage. It turned the big three of cloud computing from supporters of the administration's aggressive trade policy into victims of it, forcing them to reconsider whether the Section 301 investigation is actually in their best interest. By targeting government procurement, Canada has created a situation where the Trump administration's own actions are imposing a direct cost on American companies. The logic is simple. If the United States threatens to restrict Canada's access to digital infrastructure, Canada will respond by removing its money from the American infrastructure it currently pays for. This track is designed to trigger the powerful lobbying machinery of Silicon Valley. Within hours of the announcement, the CEOs of these tech giants were reportedly calling the White House to warn that the president's trade tactics were resulting in the loss of multi-billion-dollar contracts to foreign competitors. Canada has effectively outsourced its lobbying effort to the very American companies Trump claimed he was trying to protect, making the $4.2 billion review the most strategically effective part of the entire counter-response.